The 2022 legislative session has now concluded, and lawmakers have now gone back to their districts and embedded themselves back in their communities. And most of us will face the voters again this fall. Hi, I'm Representative Roger Goodman, coming to you from the State Capitol building in Olympia with the Japanese cherry blossoms behind me. And I'm here to review the accomplishments of the 2022 legislative session. Because of the COVID pandemic, most of this two-year legislative session was conducted entirely remotely. Although at the end of this year, almost 50 members of the House did return to serve in person, a sign that the COVID pandemic is finally waning. I want to highlight four major policy areas that the legislature focused on this year: housing and homelessness, education, environmental protection, and public safety. Homelessness and lack of affordable housing are at crisis proportions in Washington state, and the economic downturn in the wake of the pandemic has exacerbated the problem. In response, we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars to keep people housed, including $160 million for utility assistance, $45 million for rental assistance, and $100 million for homelessness services. We've also allocated almost $500 million for new housing, including $300 million for rapid capital acquisition to buy vacant hotels and turn them into permanent supportive housing. In addition, $60 million for permanent supportive housing and $113 million for the Housing Trust Fund. Homelessness and affordable housing are still vexing challenges in our state, and we still have a long way to go to provide the needed assistance for housing security, especially including dealing with the medical and mental health needs that underlie so much of the homelessness problem. Public education is our paramount duty, and we devote more than half of our total budget to the public schools. During the pandemic, students and families suffered tremendously, and schools and teachers did a heroic job to adapt to an almost impossible situation. As we emerge from the pandemic, it's very clear that our students' mental health needs are our top priority. There already was a mental health crisis with our students, and now it has only gotten worse. In response, we will be providing, for the next 3 years, $640 million to put nurses and mental health counselors in every school. The research is clear that when there is a nurse in a school, it's actually linked to better student performance. And as far as counselors are concerned, we're not talking about counselors that help your student get into college. We're talking about counselors trained in mental health who help deal with the underlying problems affecting student academic achievement. Parental involvement is critical for a student's success. We passed House Bill 1153 to provide access to information in native languages to ensure that there's culturally responsive family engagement for students. Students and families needing language interpretation deserve the same opportunities as their peers in a language that they can understand better. During the pandemic, we've seen a significant decline in school enrollment, and schools have lost a lot of funding because they are paid per student. In response, we have provided more than $350 million to stabilize school funding with large enrollment declines due to the COVID pandemic. Finally, to compensate teachers who selflessly sacrificed during the challenges of the pandemic, we have raised teacher salaries, devoting $860 million to help keep up with inflation and the cost of living. For higher education, we passed legislation to set up a new state-level college loan program with only a 1% interest rate to ease the crushing burden of student debt. Environmental protection, particularly addressing the climate crisis, remains a top priority for us. In 2021, we passed landmark legislation capping carbon emissions statewide and mandating the production of low-carbon transportation fuels. This year, we followed up with further legislation to limit carbon emissions, including House Bill 1619 to expand energy efficiency standards to a greater range of household appliances to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, water use, and costs for Washington families. We also passed House Bill 1663 to require large municipal landfills to install and operate gas collection and control systems to capture methane and prevent it from getting into the atmosphere. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and most of it comes from our sanitary landfills. I serve as chair of the House Public Safety Committee, and last year I oversaw the enactment and implementation of a broad package of police accountability reforms. This year, we clarified and refined those laws to make sure that police can do their jobs effectively, especially when dealing with mental health crisis, protecting vulnerable children, using less lethal alternatives to force, and making sure that they can detain criminal suspects. To that effect, we passed a number of bills, including House Bill 1719, which clarifies how police should use less lethal ammunition, such as beanbag rounds and foam projectiles. House Bill 1735, that ensures that police officers have the legal certainty they need to assist other first responders with mental health and other so-called community caretaking calls. And finally, House Bill 2037, a bill I sponsored that gives police clear authority to detain criminal suspects who attempt to flee the scene. Finally, we tackled the growing problem of catalytic converter theft and passed House Bill 1815, which regulates the purchase and sale of detached catalytic converters, sets up law enforcement with resources to focus on metal theft, and creates new violations for selling stolen catalytic converters. This is a complex problem, but we're confident that this legislation will help stem the tide of catalytic converter theft. The legislature has accomplished so much in the last 2 years, and we're fortunate to have resources to make major investments in our communities. We have a very strong economy with a booming high-tech sector, a lot of home sales, and an infusion of a huge amount of federal money. We are doing so much better than most other states, striving to maintain and improve our very high quality of life. Thanks for watching, and thanks for your interest in important matters of public policy. I hope you and your family are staying healthy and safe. Thanks again.